Shalom. I'm the Messianic Torah dude, and this week's Torah portion is Va'era. So grab your authentic Nile River water and join us as we look at the first 7 of the 10 plagues. Va'era, and I appeared, comes to us from Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 through 9, verse 35. So this week's Torah portion focuses mainly on the first of the 7 plagues. But before it really gets into that, we see a showdown between Moses and Aaron and the Pharaoh's magicians. So in Exodus chapter 7, verses 8 through 13, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourselves by working miracles,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.' So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerer and the magicians of Egypt. Also they did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staff. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said." Here we see that Moses and Aaron are showing that what they can do is superior to what Pharaoh's magicians can do, and yet Pharaoh's not willing to believe. An interesting thing about this particular story is there's still a debate going on today what it means by the term their secret arts. We don't know how the Egyptian magicians went about turning their staves into snakes. We know how Moses and Aaron did it. But the Egyptian magicians, it could have been a form of demonic sorcery. It could have been just sleight of hand. The hand is quicker than the eye. David Copperfield, the magician, not the Dickens story. We don't know how they did it. But regardless of which one you choose to believe, because there's not a definitive answer short of getting in a little blue box and going back to find out. If you believe that it was through some demonic force, then these snakes came about through some form of spiritual power. But the Lord showed his supremacy over whatever spiritual power brought those about, showed his supremacy over all things of the spiritual world. Now, if they were snakes that the magicians had hidden or were doing by some type of sleight of hand, keep a snake up your sleeve or whatever, then it shows the Lord's supremacy over the physical world. And as we go through the plagues, what we're going to see, or what is contained within the subtext, is the fact that each of the 10 plagues were specifically meant to be insults or to show God's superiority over the things that the Egyptians worshipped. The Egyptians had a god that was supposed to be protector of the Nile, and they had a god that was supposed to be like a lady with a frog head, and they had a god that was supposed to be protector of cattle and a protector of the earth and a protector of the sky, and all of the plagues that occurred were specifically tailored to the different gods that the Egyptians worshiped, to show that the Lord is superior, not only superior to the laws of physics and the rules of the physical world, but also superior to the spiritual things that people wanted to bow to. The first plague we have is the Nile River turning to blood. And in chapter 7, verse 20 through 24, it says, "Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. He lifted up the staff and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house and did not take even this to heart. And the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile." Now, one of the interesting things that I didn't actually read, in verse 19, it talks about how even the water in pitchers and vessels of stone was going to turn into blood. So if you had poured some Nile water or scooped up some Nile water, taken it back to your house, and had it there in your house, that water would have turned to blood. Even which I think the all-time worst would have been if you were cooking something with it or brewing coffee or something. Anyway, but notice what it takes for Pharaoh not to believe. It takes the magicians showing that they can replicate the problem. Ah, somebody just beat me up.
That's nothing.
How is that helpful? You see, Pharaoh wasn't convinced by the Egyptians. He wanted an excuse. He wanted an excuse to say no. The next plague we have is the plague of frogs, where Moses waved his staff over the water, and frogs came out of the water. Now, the Egyptians worshipped frogs in a sense. They had a god with a frog head. No, it wasn't Mr. Toad. Anybody remember that? Mr. Toad's Wild Ride? No? Okay. So the frogs came, and they were everywhere. They were in people's beds. They were in their cookware. They were in the bowls that they used to cook. They were jumping in the ovens. Now, part of this Egyptian frog worship cult religion thing that they had meant that frogs were supposed to be protected. In the same way, when you go to India today, they have all of these rules about how you're supposed to treat a cow, where the term sacred cow comes from. This animal was supposed to be protected and it's supposed to be kept safe. But they were everywhere. They were all over everything. It's almost like saying, okay, you want to worship a stupid frog? Fine, I'll give you all the frogs you can handle. But then there's the second part of this plague, which adds insult to further insult. It's almost like you slap somebody with the front of your hand and then slap them with the back of your hand coming back. Because when the plague ended, the frogs didn't just go away. The frogs died. So now they've gone from having frogs all over the place and in everything to dead frogs all over the place and in everything. But again, Pharaoh's magicians didn't solve the problem, didn't help make the frogs go away, didn't create an area where there were no frogs. They simply made the problem worse.
Oh, there's so many dishes!
They called more frogs, but that was enough for Pharaoh not to believe. And as we go through the rest of the plagues, the next plague is a plague of lice or mites or fleas. The language is kind of vague, but we get the idea. It's some type of small biting insect. With the gnats and the lice, the magicians say, okay, you know what? This really is God's work, because we can't do this. We can't imagine somebody being able to replicate this. This is a legit miracle, and we have nothing to say. But Pharaoh didn't believe. And as the plagues go on, one of the things that happens, the last plague we have in this week's Torah portion, is the plague of hail. Now, when the hail comes, or when Moses warns the people of the hail, I should say, everybody who had been seeing what has been happening up until this point brings their livestock in. And they make sure everybody's in the house when the hail comes, because they know what's up. But Pharaoh still doesn't believe. He still won't acknowledge what's right in front of him. And the thing about Pharaoh is we have to understand that his stubbornness is not unique to him. It's a very common thing in all of humanity. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, it says, speaking of the Lord, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, They did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Sometimes people don't listen. Sometimes people don't believe. And it's because they don't want to believe. They would rather take in the lie. And it's important for us to remember that no amount of argument is going to overcome somebody wanting not to believe. Now, studying apologetics is great. One of my favorite authors is Lee Strobel. I'm not going to down talk studying apologetics. But what I will say is all of that has to be tempered with the love of Yeshua, the love of Messiah. Because that's something no one can argue about. And that's something even the hardest heart will eventually be softened by. What are some ways that we can use the love of Messiah to soften the hearts of the people in our lives? Let me know in the comments. And if I gave you a laugh, give me a like. And if you learned something, give me a share. I'm the Messianic Torah dude. Shalom, and stay in the Word.